Support for this podcast comes from the Utah Office of Tourism, announcing the Four Corners School of Outdoor Education, offering a wide variety of field-based educational hiking and rafting adventures, from day trips to week-long adventures throughout the Colorado Plateau. Nearby attractions include Canyonlands National Park, Hovenweep National Monument, Natural Bridges National Monument, Monument Valley Tribal Park, Cedar Mesa, and the San Juan River. More at fourcornersschool.org.
Blog Talk Radio.
To an astounding future that lies ahead, one that will be here sooner than you think, and one that you have an important role to play in bringing about. At the World Transformed, we want to introduce you to what may be the greatest transformation of them all, the one that begins with considering and acting on the almost limitless possibilities that lie ahead, and that ends somewhere beyond the reach of the human imagination. So, when does this amazing future begin? Well, today is the day. My name is Phil Bowermaster, and with me in the virtual studio is my co-blogger, co-futurist, and co-host, Stephen Gordon. Hello, Stephen.
Hey, Phil. How are you?
Well, I'm super fantastic. How are you, my friend?
Doing great.
We got an interesting kind of a grab bag of a show lined up. We've got a very serious topic to begin with, and then sort of a mixed bag of topics after that. So it's
I'm hopeful it won't be too much of a downer topic, but I mean, but we'll deal with it. It's certainly interesting.
It's an important one. I actually wanted to make the show what I'm now listing as the optional topic tonight, which is has big data been hyped enough? Because I think that's a fun show when you start calling for additional hype on big data. But a big thing happens in space, in the world of space, and it's something that we track and we talk about, and it's something that we need to talk about tonight, especially because of some of the discussion that has ensued since Spaceship 2 tragically crashed last week. We know a little bit about what occurred. We don't know too much about what occurred. Obviously there was some kind of malfunction in the wings or the flaps. It was not configured properly for that kind of rocket burn, and it just apparently caused the craft to disintegrate. One of the mysteries currently is how the pilot actually managed to survive. There was no ejection seat in Spaceship 2, but he managed to parachute to the ground, and the co-pilot lost his life, was killed in this, just terrible catastrophe. Obviously, all our thoughts and sympathies with the family of the man who lost his life, and the injured pilot as well, and a good deal of concern now for the Virgin Galactic organization and for basically for the future of commercial manned space. I mean, that's all been sort of called into question here in the past week or so, and you see increasingly people talking about it. There have been kind of outright condemnations that we shouldn't be doing that in the first place, that it's not worth risking a person's life to, basically go thrill-seeking, which is one way of looking at what space tourism is. And, there have been other arguments to the effect of we don't really need people in space. Everything we're doing in space we could do with robots, and we've talked a lot about that, that a lot of the commercial development of space can actually be performed by automated systems. So there's something to that. But I'll put it to you, Stephen. Let's kick it off with you can take a stab at the question that we've asked here in the title of our show this evening. Does this tragedy mark the end of space tourism?
Well, I'm going to take the non-obvious side on this, Phil, is that yes, it does mark the end of space tourism, and here's what I mean by that.
Okay.
I'm not for 1 second going to suggest that private citizens will not go into space. I'm just saying you're not going to be a tourist when you do so. You're a pioneer when you do this. You're on the frontier when you do this. You are taking your life into your own hands, and you need to be aware of that. This is not something that that you just do to flippantly, and something that it's not akin to getting on a commercial jet and flying to New York City to go to the top of the Empire State Building or something like that. It's not that. This is you're on the ragged edge, and you could very well die as a result of it. And you need to kind of take that into account if you choose to do something like this. So yes, I'm saying it is the end of space tourism, but it's not the end of private citizens in space.
So what you're saying is let's stop calling it tourism.
I would say there will be a point when we have space tourism again, and but it won't be with rockets.
Okay. Space elevators, maybe, or some other
exactly,
exotic,
or even there's a possibility of lighter than aircraft actually getting into orbit. So something like but whenever you basically are on top of a controlled explosion, sometimes you lose control of the explosion, and it's just that way. Rockets are always going to be dangerous. And it's a very violent way to get into outer space. Maybe one day it won't be that way, but right now that's the way. And
it's a violent and risky way to get around. Although I should mention one of the other interesting kind of mysteries about this is apparently the rocket engine did not blow up. The spacecraft disintegrated. The engine didn't blow up. So obviously there's going to be a long investigation.
The thought is, these craft, the Spaceship 1 and now Spaceship 2. The design, it allows the tail to move to help with, coming back in to the atmosphere. Right. It helps stabilize. The thought is that the pilot didn't deploy it at the proper moment. Also, apparently, Spaceship 1, of course, was a much lighter craft. It was just meant basically for the pilot, right?
Yes.
Spaceship 2 is meant to take passengers. And it's a considerably larger vehicle, and they've been having trouble reaching the altitudes that they could get out of Spaceship 1, and so they were using experimental rocket fuel that was more explosive, apparently. I don't, but like you say, that's the cause of the crash apparently was not the engine blowing up, but could it be that a more explosive and more powerful rocket fuel that allowed them, caused them to lose control? And even without an explosion on the, of the engine, you could lose control and then the craft break up.
Right.
As a result.
At this point, it's early to say, and the investigation will, we hope, yield an understanding of what occurred that will make it possible to avoid this particular bad thing from happening again. But I mean, the bottom line, you make a really good point, Stephen, which is that. You don't call this tourism. There's actually two reasons why you don't call this tourism.
Right.
And one reason you don't call this tourism is it wasn't. These were test pilots. Okay. These were people out testing, a spacecraft. And as I believe Rand Simberg has pointed out, sadly, but of great necessity in some ways, pilots have been dropping from the sky over that particular piece of desert. Which is adjacent to Edwards Air Force Base for more than half a century. It happens sometimes because some of the most sophisticated flight test that's ever occurred has occurred right in that area. And, it's not a thing to rejoice at. It's not a thing to be happy about, but it is part of what makes aviation possible. And it's part of what makes space exploration possible is that you send these test pilots up in these craft that, haven't been tested yet, that haven't been proved yet to work and you discover whether things are going to work or not. And sometimes it's recoverable when things don't work, and sometimes, sadly, it's not recoverable. Flight test is, one of the most dangerous jobs a person can have. And so for one thing, to describe that as tourism is absolutely wrong. So I agree with you, Stephen. It's the death of calling things that aren't tourism. And to swing it back around, you're right. This is private individual space exploration. In the same way that, one analogy that occurred to me is climbing Everest, right? There's a certain amount of tourism that goes on all the way up to base camp, right? But anybody who starts to summit, who attempts to summit, that's not tourism anymore, okay? And 200 people have died in the attempt to summit Everest. I mean, that is mountain climbing, right? It's it's a different activity. And the fact that 200 people have died, I don't think is slowing it down at all. Interestingly, if anything, more people are trying to do it now than have tried to do it before. I got an email from the Abundance, the Future is Better Than You Think mailing list from Peter Diamandis. This was the day after. And this is really good. I just want to read this. I think it's very much in line, Stephen, with what you were saying. He writes, I'd like to share my deepest personal thoughts on today's Virgin Galactic accident. As you know, this is deeply meaningful to me, my family, and friends. Today, most importantly, my heart goes out to those who have lost loved ones, and the many at Virgin Galactic, Scaled Composites, the Virgin Group, and the Mojave Spaceport who this accident deeply affects. I urge all of us to keep something in mind. We are on the verge of opening the space frontier, one of the greatest endeavors of our species. Many Americans forget that 500 years ago, thousands of Europeans gave their lives to open up the Americas. And 200 years ago, the early Americans risked their lives to open the West. This is what exploring is all about. We risk our lives for what we believe in. This is the American way, the explorer's way. I, for one, am proud to be a Virgin Galactic client. I believe in the company and know without a doubt that they will succeed, and I will fully trust them with my safety when my turn to fly materializes. Peter Diamandis. So, I think very moving words there.
That's a very awesome statement. As always, classy as always. Peter Diamandis. That's awesome.
And
this wasn't even the only...
Because you know what? He's famous, but there are thousands of other people who feel the same way, who will still jump at the chance to go when, if and when their turn ever comes up. So the notion that this effort is ended here is silly. I think it's a ridiculous question. Any more than people are done climbing Everest because people have died doing that. Any more than we stopped trying to build fast airplanes because we lost test pilots. If you look back, just Google. I mean, if you want to have a little depressing read, Google the term mid-air collision, right, and read the Wikipedia article about that. And look at the early days of aviation when there weren't even that many airplanes in the sky, right? But they managed to keep finding a way to run into each other because I guess the flight paths were pretty similar, and there wasn't a lot of, it was all kind of dead reckoning with the eye and that sort of thing. And people were dropping from the sky in the service of what was at that time considered to be a pretty iffy proposition, commercial aviation. But it didn't slow it down. I think ultimately it led to the need to improve it and to make it better, and that's what always happens here. It's what happened with the Apollo program after Apollo 1. It's what inevitably will happen when a disaster like this occurs. But to think that we're going anywhere but forward in space, I think, is just delusional. I think we'll carry on.
Oh, absolutely. I have no doubt about that, Bill. And it might be that companies that try and then companies will try and fail, and perhaps no longer. But it might be that it's not Virgin Galactic that takes us there. But
this could be the end of Virgin Galactic. I don't think it is. I hope it's not. But it could be.
Well,
but it's not. That doesn't mean it's the end of going to space. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. It could be that Richard Branson says, you know what, I'm returning the money to investors, and I'm sticking with this or that endeavor here on the planet Earth. He could decide to give it up, and someone else would take up the mantle. That's the way it'll happen. And last week, was not the only, and of course that was the tragedy because there was loss of life. But there was another incident. Orbital Sciences lost a capsule, right? They were trying to resupply the space station with.
They did, and if I'm not mistaken, that one was an engine failure for sure. Right?
Yes, and I think it didn't even leave that atmosphere, did it? It pretty much exploded on the pad.
Pretty much, yeah.
And so, we forget, how rough it was, like in the early days of NASA. You remember that, our rockets were always blowing up. Apparently,
that's that line in The Right Stuff, right? Our boys always botch it, and our rockets always blow up, right? And that's what it is.
Exactly. Well, and the truth of the matter is, it was happening in Russia as well, but in the Soviet Union as well. But we just weren't hearing about that.
Right.
So it led to a little bit of a feeling of being underdogs for a good time, and in the early days of the space race. But it's just tough. I mean, getting things right where you have enough power to break the Earth's gravity and get out in space without blowing up, or losing control and breaking up, or whatever. There's 1,000 things that can go wrong, and it's just tough. And so it's just and we don't necessarily do it because it's hard, as Kennedy would say. That's not really the reason we do it. I think we do it because we can, and even though it's hard, and so I think we'll keep trying. So.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So if you tuned in to find out the answer to the question, is space tourism over? Yes, we're done calling it tourism for a while. Are we going to stop going into space? No. This is too big a movement to be stopped at this point, and we're going to continue. So I think with that we can move on to other topics.
Absolutely.
What do we got? What else we got to talk about tonight? So busy thinking about space, I forgot about some of the other. Oh, well, here we go. Have you heard the who's really going to steal your job? This was actually a really interesting piece over on Next Big Future, Brian Wong's site, and he's quoting a McKinsey study. There's some really interesting statistics in here. Now, we talk about this all the time. We talk about will robots steal your job? And, I think we've kind of come to this. We don't know how the economy is going to shake out, but, for any given individual, there's a really good chance that your job will be stolen by a robot eventually, right? That we seem to be heading in a direction where just about anything you can do, eventually a robot's going to be able to do it, and chances are the robot will be able to do it cheaper than you. And once that's available, most employers will go with the robot for just a lot of reasons.
At first the robot will be will do an inferior job, but much cheaper.
Right.
And you'll probably lose your job at that point. But if you manage to hang on, because let's face it, you're better than the robot. It won't be long that the robot gets better and is cheaper. So the robots tend to get better, and we tend to kind of have our limits, how good we can get. So that's kind of a bummer deal too, isn't it?
Yeah. But here's an interesting thing. Brian is saying, well, hold your horses. Maybe before that happens, it'll be somebody else who gets your job. Just some really interesting stats in here.
It's worse than you think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because he points out that there's 300 million college graduates in developing countries who don't even have to come here, right? Who could pretty much remotely work thanks to the coffee shopification of the planet, thanks to high-speed internet, and the fact that we're all pretty much connected all the time. Anyhow, they're not as cheap as a robot. Potentially will be eventually, but chances are they're cheaper than you. And if the robots don't get your job, they will. 300 million college graduates in developing countries. 300 million college graduates. That is one college graduate for every citizen of this country. Is that right?
Yeah.
We're about 300 million, right? I mean, so that's that's a one-to-one thing. They can, the rest of the world can provide, and this is surplus, right? This is overflow for the jobs that are already going to be filled over there. So, that's kind of a bleak picture, isn't it?
I was this was like a couple of years ago, Phil, that I went through a drive-through and I had my order taken by somebody that was obviously in India.
Wow.
At the local drive-through, and they took my order. Obviously put the order in at the local, right there at that restaurant. But that,
right.
I thought that was interesting. The guy taking the order in the restaurant doesn't have to be in the restaurant anymore.
Right.
Take the order,
or
put
on
it on
continent.
the computer screen of the
yeah. Good grief, that's amazing. Yeah. But there it is. Right? I mean that just goes to show you exactly. That's a very simple task, granted. Well, okay, for something simple, it seems to get messed up quite a bit. But I'm just saying that it's theoretically a pretty simple task, taking somebody's order at a fast food joint. And you would think, we're kind of programmed to think, especially those of us who are a little bit older and remember a slightly different world. But you would think surely it's less trouble, right? To just hire somebody in the place who's there, but it's not.
It might not be. Maybe if you can hire some firm in India that can basically provide labor at half of minimum wage, basically.
Right.
And you're not even breaking any laws to do it. You're thinking, you're sitting there trying to figure out how to squeeze a little more profit out of your fast food chain. You might just do that. That's, and then of course you eventually you replace the workers that are flipping the burgers with a robot inside. So you got one guy in India taking the orders and then a robot fixing the hamburger in the joint. I guess you have one guy that's putting meat into the machine, and another person that's handing the stuff to the people at the drive-through window. I don't know, but basically a whole restaurant full of workers, basically. 10, 15 workers could be replaced. It could be basically replaced either by outsourcing or by robots. So
one person comes in and throws the switch every day and makes sure that the power's still
on. The man and the dog, right?
Absolutely, yeah. But you don't want a dog in a fast food joint.
Yeah, you don't want a dog in a fast food place.
That's asking for trouble. But it's interesting when you start to break that down and you think about it. What's outsourced is the information transaction portion of that process, right? There's two pieces of that process. The order entry is this communication piece of the transaction. It's where somebody comes in and says, I want this. And somebody on the receiving says, okay, they want this, so give me one of these, give me one of these, give me one of these. And they punch it into the system. That whole information thing can take place anywhere. That's what the world is telling us now.
That's right.
But you make a good point. If they want to replace the people flipping the burgers, they can't outsource that to India, right?
No.
That has to become automated. So you've got a really interesting intermediate step, which speaks to, I think, what Brian is writing about here. The information transaction portion is not something that is easily automated at this point, this year. Maybe next year, or maybe 2 years from now. You will have like a Siri-like device at your local Jack in the Box or wherever that is smart enough to understand your order, and then they don't even need the guy in India at that point, right? Because they've got a fully automated system right there that can handle it. But for now, apparently, that's more trouble than it's worth. But it's not more trouble than it's worth to have the to have the job outsourced. So you have an intermediate step on the order processing, and we're waiting for full automation on the cooking. Although cooking is a lot more automated, I think, than it used to be, because they're using microwaves and things. The whole thing has been process managed about as far as it possibly can, with humans still in the loop. And we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how long before it's a fully automated process on the front end, which seems to me that's more likely, that we'll have some kind of Siri-like Jack-in-the-Box, and then how long it is before it's fully automated on the back end. And you can use both of those as kind of indicators for what Brian is talking about here. Jobs that don't actually require anybody touching anything. Like I haven't had a job that required me to, you know what I mean, to actually touch the goods that that go out to the customer. I've never had a job that required that. Actually, I have never had that job. So if you don't have that job, that's the job that can be easily replaced by somebody being outsourced, and then eventually the robot will get it, right? If you have a job where you actually have contact with the stuff, they have to get a robot for that. So in some ways, interestingly, you're a little bit safer if you're in that position, aren't you?
I guess so. Yeah, you can't.
If safe is the right
outsource
word.
That's got to be either you're going to be doing it or someone local at least, and or a robot. I mean, it's you know. So
I mean, you think about basic personal services like getting your hair cut, right? Robots may eventually take that job, but they're never going to outsource that. You know, they can insource it. Right, they can bring cheap labor over from overseas to cut hair, but ultimately it would have to be a machine that cuts hair that replaces that job. But a lawyer, for example, right, working purely in information, could be outsourced or replaced by automation, either one. So, I guess guys like us, guys who work in information, it's a double whammy for us. Everybody else is just, you know, if you don't work directly in information, if you work directly on stuff, you know, you're waiting for the one shoe to drop. You know, here comes the robot. If you work in information, then you're waiting for both of those shoes to drop. Anyway, interesting stats in this piece. Obviously, Brian's side is always a fascinating read, and kind of a contrarian approach to this big question that you know that keeps coming up. Are the robots going to take our jobs? Well, maybe not. There might be a nice boom for folks overseas who get all our jobs before the robots get a chance. Interesting wrinkle, and I don't know what the answer is off the top of my head to what we do about that without some kind of crazy protectionist scheme that probably would do more harm than good. Yeah,
and you know, I'm thinking about you know, you mentioned attorneys, also doctors and things like that. Yep. You know, one of the things about professionals like that is licensing, which in a way is a protectionist thing, right?
Yes, it is.
And so, you know, jobs like that cannot be as easily outsourced because of legal hurdles. You know, someone who's in India might be a brilliant attorney, but they might not be licensed to practice in your particular state. So it might be a little bit difficult to outsource to India, those kind of jobs. So I guess if you're thinking about what can I do to protect myself and hang on to a job as long as possible, you might think of a profession that has a licensing process. Just a little advice to the young ones.
Yeah.
To the younglings in the audience. So.
Okay, kids, listen to Uncle Stephen. He knows what he's talking about when he gives you this advice. One of the things very interesting in this article by Brian is this chart. Global labor markets fall into 8 clusters, from the young and developing to the aging and advanced. And it just, I guess, it looks at the average, the median age. And the bubbles represent the size of it. And right in the young and advanced color, there's just this big red circle, and it's China. You know, they're this huge population, and they're not as young and developing as you would think. They're farther up the scale than more than halfway up the scale. But you can see them sitting there as a threat. And over to their left, kind of Saturn to their Jupiter, is India. Also just this big, in this case, green ball. And you look at those and you go, wow, that is a lot of people. That is a lot of resource. And they're younger and more available than the people in the countries to their right. I see, the U.S. is up there, not the oldest country, and not the most unresourced country. Actually, we're kind of holding our own there when compared to Japan and some of the European countries. But the difference is pretty stark, and what it says about where the economy is going is hard to say. It'll be interesting to keep tracking these things. That's for sure.
A thing about something like this, wealth creation of this sort is not a zero sum gain. Okay, just because India is making more money doesn't mean that they steal it from us. They're creating value there. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're creating less value here and therefore getting poorer. So I mean, it's a world economy now, though, and so people in this country need to be equipped to compete in a world economy, not just a national one. And,
and I think while wealth isn't a zero-sum game, jobs may be closer to that, right? They're because the number of them might be going down thanks to the automation catching up. So wealth isn't, but if one of the means of getting wealth is, it almost starts to push wealth in that direction too. I don't know. We'll have to get our some of our economist friends back on the show. I think the truth is in the middle there, Phil. I really think they don't get they don't steal all our money, but they or all our jobs. They by growing their economy, they're not necessarily stealing from us, but they could be. Right.
And so I think it's we just have to be prepared to compete with that and to be innovative and entrepreneurs here in this country. So,
absolutely.
At any rate.
All right, now for something completely different. And before we go to Can You Ever Really Know an Alien? I forgot to mention something in our discussion of the Spaceship Two tragedy. I wanted to point out this map of the cosmos that was excavated illegally in 1999 in Germany. It's called the Nebra Sky Disk, this picture that I'm showing both on worldtransform.com and over here at blogtalkradio.com. This is really interesting. This thing is 2,000, from about 2000 BC, so it's about 4,000 years old, this thing. And It is the oldest known depiction of the universe. Right, and it's got the sun and the moon and some stars. It's blue, green, copper inset with gold to depict the universe. You've got the Pleiades in there. You got the moon. You got the sun, and it basically is showing the relationship between the sun and the moon at winter and summer solstice at the latitude where it was found. So this is actually, to the extent that they could, the Pleiades aren't probably in the right place relative to the sun and the moon, depending on what year I guess you're looking at it. But the sun and the moon are in the correct relation to each other in terms of where they're sitting in the sky, and the other pieces are truly an attempt to portray the night sky. So, the desire to understand our universe. In this case, 4,000 years ago, to map it, and how awesome that they created a map that we still have today, these ancient Germans, and just to be a part of it, right, to reach it, to somehow connect with it, I think is so deep within us as a species. It really speaks to almost kind of our destiny in space when you look at something like that. That we've been mapping this untouchable, inaccessible area, since before civilization, right?
Even the constellations, we were naming constellations and inventing stories, and it was our way at that time of trying to make sense of things and to explore the cosmos without leaving Earth. Our interest in what's going on out there is as old as the species. So yeah,
absolutely.
And this disc is actually very beautiful.
It is. Yeah,
I'm so glad they found it.
It holds up as a work of art. Hats off to the ancient crafts person who did that. That was some really nice work. And that leads us then, Stephen. Let's say we do become successful in exploring space, not necessarily by sending rockets out, but just by sending messages out or receiving messages, and we finally find the aliens, right? We finally find, well, we're the aliens to them, but we finally find other life out there. We finally find intelligent life out there. Great news, right? The best news possible. We're not alone in the universe. Or is it? Stephen, you actually turned me on to this very interesting article about whether it's good news or bad news to find other life out in space, and questions whether we should even be looking for it. What's the objection? What's the thought here?
Well, I mean, obviously there's the why do you why in our conspiracy mythology do we have men in black? They're there to protect us from the psychic damage we would take with the knowledge that we're that they're aliens, and they're there to protect us from it, right? Because we
exactly
society's
right.
not
we're
ready.
Not ready. We'll go nuts, right? That's the
right. That was the thought, and so I don't know. I think that particularly if it was something that was remote to us, Phil, if we had incontrovertible proof that 150 light years away there's a civilization, because we got non-random artificial radio signals or something from some world that far away, and we know that they're out there, but they're way out there, and we'll in the foreseeable future we're not going to meet up with them. It's going to be a long time before we meet up with these folks. I think that it would be something that everybody would there would be some adjustments as a society to learn such a thing, but I don't think that it would be the sort of thing that would necessarily mean we tear ourselves apart or something something crazy like that. I think that it would be something that we'd find fascinating. We'd want to learn as much as we could about this other civilization out there, and we'd probably start spending more money to see if there's others in addition to that one besides ourselves. I don't think it'd be the sort of thing that would end us to learn. What's your thoughts on that, though?
Well, yeah, I'm with you. I've always thought that the classic Men in Black argument was just kind of silly. It doesn't give the public will panic, society will fall apart thing is just it doesn't give people much credit. It doesn't give credit for the fact that for most of human existence, we lived under the threat of like predators coming and killing us, or like the next village over on the village over on the next hill coming and killing us, right? Or people have lived in sieges, long-term wars, knowing that there are enemies nearby who might come and kill them. And they didn't like that. Nobody was happy with that. But did people go insane, right? Did society break down? No, it didn't. Even in these very worst-case kind of scenarios where you know of someone who's hostile to you, it does not drive people insane, and it does not lead to the total breakdown of society. So I think that argument is ridiculous. But I will say that what Caleb Scharf argues in this piece, Can You Ever Really Know an Extraterrestrial? And by the way, we should give the author credit here. He is an astrophysicist and the director of astrobiology at Columbia University. So it's not like us coming up with this stuff, right? I mean, he's obviously thought about these kinds of things before. The argument he's making is that we could unleash memes on each other, right? Which is a slightly, a slightly different take than just the whole the whole panic idea. That they might be memes that we just don't even expect, right? And they might be really good at it. They might be really good at getting inside our heads and planting ideas on us that lead to our downfall, or that they do it completely unintentionally. That they try to send us a message that they intend. One of the examples he gave was, "You're all going to die," because hey, it's just kind of a statement of existential camaraderie. Well, it probably wouldn't be taken as that, by us, right? The idea that such completely separated civilizations, cultures, truly might have a hard time communicating with each other, and might, in the process of trying to communicate with each other, unleash something horrible, make something really bad and dangerous happen. That, I have to acknowledge, is a possibility that I'd never considered before. To me, the arguments about alien invasion, or they're going to come colonize us, or they're going to come eat us, that they want the natural resources on our planets, I think those are all stupid, okay? Because anybody that far away can get the resources almost certainly closer than where they are. And if they have technology that will get them from one star to another, they can synthesize any food they need. They can, all the problems that aliens in science fiction movies and, especially space opera type stories, all the problems that they travel these great distances to try to solve, the fact that they can travel those great distances would have already solved those problems. The fact that they've advanced to that level of technology, that they can command that level of energy, that they're that sophisticated, in my opinion. So those kinds of arguments are just dumb. This one was a new one. I mean, and I've only read the article once, so I might go back and see if I can pick up a little more on exactly what the author is saying there. But it speaks to, there might be other unintended consequences too, not just informational ones, but other ones that we're not thinking of. One of the things he mentions is, what if it turns out that they're just totally poisonous, right? That would be psychologically disturbing to people, to learn that our idea of life and their idea of life are so completely different. If we were to ever encounter one, it would be completely toxic to us, or maybe even to them. Again, I just don't see people totally freaking out about that. We have the experience of someone has an infectious disease, so you put them in quarantine, right? But you still value that person as a person, even though you don't want to catch a disease from them. So I don't know, the fact that they're aliens suddenly raises it to the scale that once something unexpected happens, it's bound to trigger the worst. But then again, I don't think he's saying that it's bound to. I think what he's saying is it's possible that it could, and it's a possibility we haven't considered before.
And even societies that are on this planet there are differences that are profound among various societies on this planet. So imagine a society that could be completely different from us. They don't they're biologically they're not divided into sexes, or who knows, it could or there's 4 sexes, or and so they're and their lifespan is completely different from ours, and so their whole way of looking at life in general could be different, and they come to a different set of principles about what morality is and all that. What though I'm reminded of? I'm reminded of that great movie Enemy Mine. Remember how Davidge is stuck on this planet with his enemy, which is a Drac, right? And they're enemies, and they're trying to kill each other first, and then they come to depend on each other because they're in this hostile environment, and they eventually become friends. And the Drac has this holy book there, and in teaching Davidge how to, they got lots of time on their hands, okay? And so Davidge decides he's going to learn Drac, and and so he reads the holy book.
We should say, for those who aren't familiar with the movie, the human decides to try to learn the lizard language, basically, is what you're saying.
There you are. Exactly what I'm saying. And
yes.
And in doing so, he's reading the Drac holy book out loud, and the Drac is Jerry is what he calls him. That's not his actual name, but close.
Yeah.
Corrects him in his pronunciation and things like that, and then he says, "Okay, now translate." And and it's the reciprocity principle or the golden rule, however you want to put it. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. And he says, "Well, I've heard this before in the human, and then holy book,
Right.
And the Drac is unsurprised. He says, "Yeah, of course. Truth is truth." And so maybe a little more optimistic take on it is that truth is truth. It could be that a lot of these things are universal, and that's my hope. If we ever do encounter an alien civilization close up like that we end up having a lot in common. And that's the hope.
I think so too. Yeah, I think the possibility that we'll find beneath it all that we have more in common than is different between us is a real one. And I like to think that would prevail. Not to say that there aren't risks, but that feels more right to me, and it feels more in line with what human history, at least, has shown up to this point. I was trying to think, has there ever been an example? This is actually would make a great book if somebody wants to write this, if this has happened. But has there ever been an example of a whole civilization brought down by a meme, right? Some new idea gets in, and it just brings them down completely. There probably are, right? Like, crazy religious ideas that come along and lead to their destruction. I was thinking that there have been a couple of national economies that have been more or less destroyed by pyramid schemes, right? Which are their own kind of little mimetic thing that occurs there. But by and large, it doesn't happen. By and large, exposure to new ideas just gives everybody new ideas.
I got another story then.
Okay, go.
Another story. British imperialism. Here's an example of how it was good on at least this one occasion. There's in India. There was a tendency, particularly among the rich, that when a rich man died, then often his wife was burned with his corpse, right?
Yeah.
And
I wouldn't call that a tendency. That was a basic Hindu teaching, I believe, at the time.
Yeah, and primarily
religious practice. For what it's worth.
But primarily it was the rich that were doing it. Anyway, and basically, when the British took over their country, they were appalled, and the argument was made, well, this is just the way we do things. This is, there's a famous general, and I wish I could call his name, British general, says, well, that's fine. That's the way you do things. We have the way we do things too. When a man burns a woman, we hang him by his neck until he's dead.
Right.
You burn women, we will hang the people who do it, and we'll respect
Everybody
both
will do
cultures.
the thing they do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. That's just we're all just doing our thing, and
right.
that pretty much ended that practice in India. Yeah.
But using that analogy, who's who in that situation, right? Are the aliens going to come along, be totally appalled by the things we do, and start hanging us for them, right?
They could look at it and say, "You eat meat? You eat your fellow creatures."
Yeah, that's disgusting. Okay. Oh, it's your tradition to eat meat? Okay, well, it's our tradition to kill things that eat meat. So something like that, right?
Yeah.
See, your story could really come back and bite us here, Stephen.
Yeah, I know. I guess so. Well. At any rate, it's good that when we do encounter these incontrovertible proof that the aliens exist, it'll probably be in the form of a radio signal 150 light years away. So
right.
At any rate, that's
that'll give us time to ponder
to adapt and
the many possible interpretations of whatever the message is and. Figure out our next steps. Okay, well, we have one topic left. We've made it to our bonus topic. How about that? This This is a fairly well-timed show. Now, this was a piece over on a little blog called The Speculist, which I believe you may have some familiarity with. This is a piece I wrote, and it actually hails back to a show we did earlier this year. We were talking about our rapidly expanding data footprint, and I wrote this piece about big data. I've been, in my day job, I've been writing a lot about big data lately, and one of the prevailing notions about big data is that it's been the whole notion, the whole concept of it. Talk about a meme, right? Is it's just been kind of overhyped. We've all heard everything we need to hear about big data. Let's move on. Let's talk about other things. So I'm taking this contrarian stance, and I'm saying I think it's actually been underhyped. Okay, because all we've really talked about up to now is the huge impact that it has on business, and it is enormous, really transformative. What's going on, especially when you start looking at the data that's being captured by the Internet of Things, and just the ability to manage these massive quantities of data, the ability to go in and find answers within them, and the really incredible sophisticated analytics capability that some of these solutions are now putting into the hands of regular business users. Just regular people who now have the ability to go in and do really sophisticated analysis on these huge data sets. That's all well and good. I mean, it's huge. It's transforming business. It's changing the way businesses operate with each other, the way they operate with their customers, the way they're organized. But I think they're missing the big picture, which is that big data is actually transforming the world. It's we could almost rename this show Big Data. As a matter of fact, it would be almost as accurate a name as the world transformed, because that's really what is happening with data. And I used this example. We talked about this on the show we did. I think it was back in January or February. I talked about this General Electric airplane engine that produces a terabyte of data on every flight. Right? It's heavily hooked into the Internet of Things, and it's pumping out all this telemetry data, efficiency data, all this kind of things. And the interesting thing is this new data-centric, data-heavy version of it is like more efficient, it's quieter, it's cleaner than any previous version of it.
And more powerful.
And more powerful, yeah, exactly. It's in only one area, data, is its footprint expanding, and its data footprint is going through the roof. So you start to wonder, well, gee, what's actually happening in our world? It calls me back to the discussion we've had multiple times about how today you have one smartphone, where back 20 years ago you would have had a camcorder and a phone and a calculator and a music player, a record player, right, and a CD changer, and and all these different devices. That all these devices have been subsumed into one device. Well, what's happened? Well, the physical component has been vastly simplified, and the data component has taken over, right? So it almost seems like we're living in a world that used to be made out of stuff, and that I think we can pretty safely say is now, to a large extent, made out of stuff and data. And are we heading towards a world that is shifting even more in that direction? It seems likely that we are, but how far does it go? And do we end up living in a world that is made predominantly out of data, or even entirely out of data? What do you think, Stephen?
Oh yeah, this is I don't see any natural slowing point in the future of the growth of this sort of thing. And the engine example is perfect, because it'd be one thing if it was granting just one aspect. It's let's say it burns less fuel for the flight. Hey, that's great. I want it for that reason. Oh, and by the way, it's quieter. Oh, really? Well, then that's better for the neighborhoods near the airports. It's also better for the passengers. They're less tired after a flight because it's not noisy and vibrating, and better for the airframe. It's and it's burning less fuel and more powerful. So we get there faster too. Are you kidding me? It's better in all these ways. And so why in the world would you not want that? And so Yeah, I heard something interesting. I was, I listen to Umano in my commute now, Phil, and it's reading articles like this, and so it's another way I pick up these topics. And it's talking about using big data in marketing. And there's one company that sells a French fry maker that's, makes better, crisper fries. One of the things that the marketing department was doing was they were monitoring tweets of people that were complaining about soggy fries. And they'd find out where that was happening, and they'd contact restaurants.
Oh, and then go sell them a French fry maker.
They go sell them this unit that makes these better, crisper fries. It's just stuff like that you don't even think about, and the big data touches us in ways we don't even know. And all of a sudden, you get better French fries at your restaurant. You don't know that it's because of big data,
right.
that led to that. You're just happier with the fries, right?
Yeah, so, exactly. The world just got a little bit better because the information component of your French fries was not contained any longer. That information got out. It got into the right hands to make a change possible that wouldn't necessarily have occurred before. That's amazing. That's actually, it's somewhere between the jet engine and that French fry example. You can see that the whole world is going in that way, right? I mean, there it is.
Right.
The info component of French fries has become drastically more important than it was in the past. That's all you have to say. Do we live in a data-driven? Our world's made of data. Our French fries are made of data now. End of story. I think there's that. That pretty much. That's a wonderful example. I like that. So it comes back to Bucky Fuller. We always mention ephemeralization. We're doing more and more with less and less until eventually we do everything with nothing. But we're in kind of an intermediate stage because we're doing more and more with less and less stuff, but we're doing more and more with more and more data. It's like the data is replacing the stuff. And I don't know where Buckminster Fuller would have been on the, on the whole is data stuff. And eventually we might start ephemeralizing even data. And won't that be interesting when we start doing more and more with even with even less data? But I think we're a long way off from the doing everything with nothing stage, right? We're doing more with less, but we're not to doing everything with nothing.
We're doing more with
yet.
more right now. Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing more with more, but less stuff. Just more data. But we're using less of what we always think of as stuff. The energy, matter, the time, the space, and we are using more data. So this shift is occurring to a data-centric world. Big data really is changing the world, and that's why I make the case that big data isn't being hyped enough, that our world is kind of changing under our feet. And I don't know if people have thought about it in these terms or, what the implications of it are. And, of course, with no time left, we won't be getting into those implications this evening. But I can assure you, folks, that we will get into them many times over the programs to come in the future. Stephen, what's our music?
Music tonight is In Good Company by Shockbox.
Shockbox with In Good Company. Well, thank you, Stephen, for putting that together. Thank you all for being with us. We look forward to you. Well, let me try that again. We look forward to being with you all again next week with an all-new program. And until next time, live to see it.
To niche it down. At Les Schwab Tires, we're drivers just like you. We merge, we get stuck in traffic, we go on road trips, and we know what it means to truly rely on your car, which is why we do everything we can to make things right with you and your vehicle. From checking your brakes for free to patching up a flat when you need it. So if that sounds good to you, well, we're right there with you. Les Schwab Tires. Doing the right thing matters.
20, 40, 60, 80, 100. 20, 40, 60, 80, 200.
20, 40, 60, 80, 300. 20, 40, 60.
When you need to move money from one place to another, count on Western Union. Western Union, moving money for better. For just $11, send up to $1,000 from a participating King Soopers agent location in this area for next day pickup within the U.S. Fees may vary by brand, channel, and location, and are subject to change without notice. Funds availability subject to terms and conditions of service.